Hello and welcome to our webinar. I'm Melanie Ross and I will be the facilitator of our webinar today. Our presenter is Allison Getz. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on forensic science standards, a look at OSAC and collaborations to support discipline-specific standards development and implementation. Please note that we are recording this webinar, so it will be available on the ANAB website for viewing in the future. Some logistics before we get started. Due to the attendance today, everyone will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please enter any of your questions into the Q&A box within the WebEx platform. We have planned time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that are asked. Again, our presenter today is Allison Getz. She has 20+ years combined experience working in forensic science, quality management, and standard development. She's currently a physical scientist in NIST's Special Programs Office, keeping OSAC members and stakeholders informed and engaged in forensic science standards development and implementation, as well as quality assurance initiatives. We're excited to have Allison today to present our webinar for us. And with that, Allison, I will pass the ball to you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Melanie, and thanks to ANAB for inviting me to speak today. Just before we begin, a brief disclaimer that the opinions provided in this presentation are mine and not those of NIST, the U.S. Department of Commerce, or the U.S. government. So here's a look at our objectives for today. After the webinar, I hope you'll know more about OSAC, its activities, and its impacts, gain insight into the current state of standardization in forensic science, and see how it relates to accreditation. And finally, explore some ways that you can participate in the standards development process. So I'd like to start off today by briefly talking about the role of standards. The International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, describes the essence of standards very well. They define what great looks like. Standards are everywhere, and they ensure consistency in processes and reliability and safety in products. During a recent event at NIST, the president of ASTM International made a really cool statement that resonated with us standards folks in the audience. He described an aircraft as being thousands of standards flying in close formation. And when you think about it, it really is true. There are standards for the materials that go into building the aircraft, standards for how to assemble the parts, and standards for testing the airworthiness of the aircraft. The airline industry is very safe with respect to the number of aircraft in operation and the number of daily flights. And standards have quite a bit to do with that. If we take our example from 30,000 feet into the air to 10,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, we have a good example of what can go wrong when standards are not applied. There aren't too many deep sea submersibles in operation, and the Titan failure, which resulted in the unfortunate loss of life, is a strong example of what can go wrong in the absence of standards. The focus of today's webinar is on another high-stakes industry or field, forensic science. The results generated by forensic labs play an essential role in the criminal justice process, and the margin for error is thin. Someone's innocence or guilt can hang in the balance. When it comes to forensic science, there are some big questions that need to be addressed. For example, do we understand the task, the process, the system? Do we have the right analytical methods and technologies available? Do we have the right people in the right roles with the right information and the right skills? And then finally, how can we best communicate the work that's been done in the lab to the legal system? Standards can help to provide some consistency and a framework to better answer these questions. Unfortunately, some view standards as a means of monitoring and control, but in reality, they're a means of setting boundaries and guiding practices in the right direction toward consistent results that may lead to more easily interpretable reports and opinions. Forensic science standards are crucial for enhancing reliability and trust in the results produced by forensic examinations. Forensic science has a very diverse set of stakeholders. In the US, there are over 336 million people spread across 50 states. And these 50 states are divided into over 3,200 counties and 19,000 cities. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, there are about 423 crime labs at the federal, state, or local levels. In addition to these 400 plus publicly funded labs, there are over 18,000 law enforcement agencies, over 2,000 ME and coroner offices, and more than 2,300 prosecutors and 1,000 public defender offices. Most crime lab services are handled at the state and local level, and in essence, each state has its own criminal justice system independent of the federal government. If we think back on our earlier aircraft example, the transportation industry is highly regulated, but regulations surrounding forensic science, however, are almost non-existent. In the United States, there's no central forensic science regulator or scheme owner. In 2009, the National Academies of Science, or NAS, published a report that identified various issues within the forensic science field. Some of these issues included having fragmented and inconsistent operations within and between jurisdictions, having a lack of mandatory training, continuing education, certification, and accreditation programs, and having a lack of standards within and between disciplines. The NAS report also made recommendations for how the field can be strengthened. One of the recommendations included having NIST, in conjunction with government labs, universities, and private labs, develop tools for advancing measurements, validation, reliability, information sharing, and proficiency testing, establishing protocols, and establishing standards. And it was noted that these standards should reflect best practices and serve as accreditation tools for labs and guides for the education, training, and certification of professionals. NIST was mentioned as part of this NAS recommendation because it has a unique mission within the federal government, which is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. NIST is a non-regulatory agency, which enables us to play an important role as a convener, facilitating collaboration between federal government agencies, industry, private organizations, and state and local governments. The Organization of Scientific Area Committees for Forensic Science, or OSAC, is administered by NIST, and it was established in 2014 to help address some of the issues identified in the NAS report, specifically around standardization. OSAC is a federal program that facilitates the development and implementation of forensic science standards, and it's comprised of a Forensic Science Standards Board, or FSSB, that's shown in the middle of the illustration here, and the FSSB serves as OSAC's governing board. There are also 7 scientific area committees, or SACs, and those are represented here by these larger pie pieces. The SACs provide direction and oversee the work of 22 discipline-specific subcommittees, and you can see those here by the individual icons. The subcommittees work to identify existing forensic science standards, draft new ones, and facilitate their development through the Standards Developing Organization, or SDO, process. Additionally, the FSSB has established various task groups that aren't shown here, but they serve as resources for all of these committees. These task groups have expertise in areas related to human factors, legal, quality, and statistics. If you're familiar with ANAB's forensic accreditation scopes, you'll see that they look very similar to OSAC's structure. OSAC's over 800 members and affiliates work in forensic labs and other institutions across the country, and these dedicated people are all volunteers. They all have day jobs. Most are practitioners, but members also include educators, researchers, people from the legal community, among others. OSAC collaborates with and supports a wide range of stakeholders like the ones you see here, including quality system providers like ANAB, as well as certification and proficiency test providers. So let's take a look now at what OSAC does and what we don't do. OSAC facilitates the development of discipline-specific standards through a formal SDO development process. And the key word here is to facilitate the development of standards, because OSAC is not an SDO. However, our 22 discipline-specific subcommittees draft standards and then work with SDOs, send these documents to them to be further developed and published. So you might hear people say or use the term OSAC standards. OSAC doesn't own standards. We provide the seed document or an OSAC proposed standard that is sent to an SDO. It's really the SDO that owns the published standards. OSAC also evaluates these OSAC proposed and the SDO published standards for placement on the OSAC registry. And we'll talk more about the registry in a minute. And finally, we endorse and encourage the community to implement the standards that are on the OSAC registry. After all, standards can only make an impact if they're actually put into use. So some things that we don't do. Since OSAC is not an SDO, we don't publish standards. And remember that NIST is a non-regulatory agency, so OSAC doesn't have the authority to enforce the use of standards. Standards are voluntary documents. They're developed by consensus and used by choice. So OSAC is not the implementation police. We endorse the standards on the registry and we encourage the community to use them. So you just heard me talking a little bit about the registry, but what exactly is the OSAC registry? Well, it is a repository of selected, published, and proposed standards for forensic science. And these documents contain minimum requirements, best practices, standard protocols, terminology, or other information to promote valid, reliable, and reproducible forensic results. The standards on the registry have undergone a technical and quality review process that encourages feedback from forensic science practitioners, research scientists, human factors experts, statisticians, legal experts, and the public. And again, OSAC encourages the forensic science community to implement the standards on the registry to help advance the practice of forensic science. There's an incredible amount of effort devoted to the process of creating a body of discipline-specific forensic science standards. And here's a very simplified depiction to better illustrate OSAC's role in the standards development process. So to start, OSAC subcommittees work to develop a draft document or OSAC proposed standard. And the FSSB has identified the 9 topics you see here as priorities for standards development. Within these topic areas, there are minimum requirements that must be addressed. Next, the draft is open for a comment period where stakeholders from the forensic science community are invited to submit input. During that same time, the FSSB's resource task groups are encouraged to review the draft and also submit comments from a human factors, legal, statistics, and quality management perspective. Additionally, and if applicable, an independent group of subject matter experts will also evaluate the draft according to set criteria and provide comments to the drafting subcommittee. After this open comment period, the subcommittee will then review and adjudicate any comments, and they may also revise the draft OSAC proposed standard based on these comments. Next, the FSSB is given an opportunity to review the OSAC proposed standard and vote to add it to the registry. The OSAC proposed standard is then sent to an SDO for further development and publication. And the main SDOs we work with are the Academy Standards Board, or ASB, ASTM International, and the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence, or SWIG-DE. This SDO process can take several years, so to help fill the gap during the time it takes for the document to be published, OSAC encourages the community to get a jump start on implementation by using the OSAC proposed standard that's on the registry. After the document completes the SDO's development process and is published, this published version can replace the OSAC proposed standard on the registry. So as you can see, standards take a long time to develop. Many stakeholders bring various perspectives to the table, and it takes time to understand them and reach a consensus. I share this slide with you to give you an appreciation of how much the registry has grown, and it shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. OSAC added the first standard, the standard practice for the identification of seized drugs, to the registry in 2016. It took a little time to gain momentum, but about 5 years later in 2022, we added the 100th standard to the registry. We ended fiscal year 24, so September 30th of this year, with 206 standards representing over 20 specific forensic science disciplines. Over the course of a decade, hundreds of experts in nearly 24 disciplines have contributed to developing discipline-specific forensic science standards. Here's a snapshot of the current standards landscape. So currently, there are 217 standards on the OSAC registry. 68 of those are OSAC proposed, and 149 have been published by an SDO. More than 60 standards have been published by an SDO and are eligible for the OSAC registry. They need to go through that review process. There are about 250 OSAC drafted standards that are at an SDO right now, where they will be further developed and published. And these include new documents, revisions, and documents being reviewed as part of their 5-year management cycle. And then there are over 100 forensic science standards that are being drafted inside of OSAC right now. So with all of these standards on the registry and under development, you might feel a little overwhelmed, but don't worry, because finding all of these documents is easy. So this fall, OSAC launched a new interactive registry webpage. And here you can sort the standards on the registry by an OSAC subcommittee using keywords, or the document owner, meaning either an SDO or OSAC. And you can also see archived versions of standards. The standards are listed on the page in the order in which they were added to the registry, so it's easy to see the latest additions. And when you click on the plus sign next to a document, you can also access a link to actually view the document and see any comments and adjudications associated with it. You'll also see links to fact sheets and checklists if they're available, and we'll talk more about these resources in a minute. You can access the registry webpage via the QR code you see here or from the OSAC website. So while we were building the registry webpage, we took it a step further and also created a forensic science standards library. This is also an interactive database of the documents not only on the registry, but also in the various stages of the development process. So like the registry webpage, you can search for documents by the OSAC subcommittee or discipline, keywords, the document owner, and also now by status. So you can specifically search for SDO published standards, those that are at an SDO, and those that are being developed at OSAC. And again, you can access the Forensic Science Standards Library via the QR code here or on the OSAC website. OSAC encourages the forensic science community to implement the standards on the OSAC registry. But with over 200 documents, this may seem like a daunting endeavor. There's only one way to eat an elephant, right? And that's one bite at a time. And when it comes to implementation, forensic science service providers are encouraged to take that same approach, one bite at a time. So for example, you can start by reviewing the standards on the registry in maybe just one discipline to see which ones your lab might already be following, which ones you maybe could follow, and if there are any possible gaps that exist. As part of a cooperative agreement with NIST, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences is developing tools and resources to help forensic science service providers with standards implementation. One of these resources is fact sheets, and these are one-page documents that are intended to be understandable to the layperson. They highlight the purpose of a particular standard, why it's important, and the benefits to using it. Along with fact sheets, the Academy is also developing standards checklists, and these are intended to help forensic science service providers identify gaps and track their progress towards implementation by providing a place to document objective evidence on how they're meeting the clauses in a standard. And the feedback that we've been hearing from the community is that these checklists are extremely useful tools. So we encourage you to check them out and provide feedback on them. We want to know what's working and what isn't, and if there are maybe some lines in the checklist that aren't clear. All of this is important information that can help to improve future standards. And again, if you would like to access the fact sheets and checklists, you can check out these QR codes, or you can access them on the OSAC Registry webpage. So it should come as no surprise that NIST, as the Natural Metrology Institute for the United States, we really like to measure things. So as more standards are added to the registry, we want to better understand how they're being used and measure the impact that they're having on the forensic science community. Since 2021, OSAC has been reaching out to forensic science service providers to find out which standards they're using and how. So to date, there are about 215 forensic science service providers that have provided us with implementation data. This map shows the percentage of standards implementers per state. This is mapped against the 423 crime labs from the BJS data. So in total, about 30% of the publicly funded crime labs have implemented at least one standard on the OSAC registry. And here's a look at the top 10 implemented standards according to our survey information. So seeing as how about 90% of crime labs are accredited, it should come as no surprise that ISO 17025 is the most implemented standard. Of the 215 implementers, 131 use this standard. Here are the other 9 most implemented standards, and you'll see that this list has some nice diversity with 4 specific disciplines, seized drugs, firearms, DNA, and toxicology represented, in addition to the interdisciplinary standards. I will say there's a caveat with the standard in the number 2 position here, ASTM E2917. So this is an interdisciplinary standard for training, continuing education, and professional development programs. A new version of the standard was recently published and added to the registry, replacing the previous 2019 version. So if we would look at this list today, the 2020 version of E2917 wouldn't make the cut since there's some transition time for labs to review and implement the new standard. Here's a closer look at the specific disciplines that are using standards on the registry. Again, it's not surprising that interdisciplinary standards have the most implementers since they go hand in hand with accreditation. When it comes to specific disciplines, seized drugs, friction ridge, and DNA are leading the charge. So let's take a step back now and bring all of these pieces together. So if you've taken an ANAB ISO 17025 or 20 or a technical assessor course, You've probably heard about the cake of quality, which I think is a great example that's used to describe the different layers of quality. I also like to think of this like building a house. So the foundation for many, not necessarily all, standards come from internationally recognized standards. So for example, ISO 17025 and 17020 are the foundation for accreditation in forensic science, and they provide the general requirements for testing and calibration labs and inspection bodies. After the foundation comes the frame. So in addition to ISO 17025 and 17020, accrediting bodies have developed their own supplemental requirements. So for example, if you're accredited by ANAB to ISO 17025, you've also met the supplementary requirements in AR 3125. These AB requirements help to provide additional support to the general ISO standards. So now it's time to build in the specific functions of the house. So for example, wiring for electricity and the pipes for plumbing. We can think of these specific functions as discipline-specific requirements, like the QAS for DNA or ABFT requirements for toxicology. And here's where OSAC comes in too. So think of OSAC kind of like a project manager. We can help to figure out what other discipline-specific standards are needed and facilitate their development. Finally, to top it all off, there are your organization's management system requirements, so your own SOPs and policies and procedures. And in this illustration, AAB or the accrediting body can be considered the building inspector to help ensure that the whole house is up to code and meeting all of these different requirements. So as we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, forensic science is a high-stakes industry or field, and the goal is to provide the most accurate and reliable results possible. Standards, accreditation, and certification form a triad of quality, with each leg of this triangle relying on the other for support. So for example, accrediting bodies audit to standards, and there are standard ways that accreditation processes are performed. The same with certification. In order to be certified, individuals are often tested on their knowledge, and the tests are administered in a highly standardized manner. Since the 2009 NIST report, the forensic science field has made notable improvements in these areas. For example, according to BJS, again, about 90% of the state and large crime labs are now accredited. Looking specifically at ANAB, ANAB has accredited approximately 688 forensic testing and calibration labs to ISO 17025 and about 99 forensic inspection bodies to 17020. Regarding standardization, OSAC has received data from forensic science service providers showing that about 30% have participated in implementation. We know there's always room for improvement, and there's still more work that needs to be done. So conformity assessment activities like accreditation and certification form a vital link between standards, which define the necessary characteristics or requirements. From the accreditation point of view, national standards can supplement in-house SOPs, helping to simplify document creation and providing confidence that a lab is operating at a minimally acceptable level from a national point of view. Risk can be mitigated as other labs follow similar protocols, and root cause analysis can become simpler through shared experience and data. With respect to certification, testing could be arranged based on standards that set a harmonized foundation for both knowledge and practice, and the tests themselves could be better standardized to reduce bias and better measure performance on an even playing field. Again, the ultimate goal of conformity assessment is to provide confidence in an organization's methods, people, results, etc., and standards are critical to accomplishing this. So the triad of quality, standardization, accreditation, and certification work hand in hand to strengthen forensic practice. These are all critical components of quality assurance, but for the most part, they're all voluntary. So how can labs demonstrate their commitment to quality and operational excellence? Well, we can use the stages of conformity assessment as a roadmap. So for example, in a first-party conformity assessment, the lab is performing a self-assessment. And this is where OSAC Registry implementers are now. If you're a lab new to standards implementation, you can do a self-assessment to review and determine which standards on the registry are applicable to your organization. Then do a gap analysis to see which clauses you may already be following. The checklists that we talked about earlier are a great tool that you can use to help you do this gap analysis. A second party assessment activity is peer review. Here, labs could ask for the help of another unit in their organization or another lab to do an assessment of their quality management system. And this is similar to a program OSAC is establishing to help with implementation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Finally, a third-party conformity assessment is when an independent entity, like ANAB, reviews a lab's quality management system to determine whether it is competent to carry out the work detailed in its accreditation scope. It may take some time to get there, but our hope is that accrediting bodies may one day incorporate the standards from the registry into assessments in the future. In the meantime, labs that can't commit to accreditation, maybe due to cost or other resource constraints, can become OSAC Registry implementers as another way to showcase their commitment to quality. For labs that are interested in accreditation, implementing some of the discipline-specific standards can maybe serve as a stepping stone to help prepare them for the accreditation process. There's not really a one-size-fits-all approach here, but there is a one-size-fits-all mentality, and that is all about improvement and strengthening the field. So if you are an accredited CAB and you're using standards on the OSAC registry, including ISO 17025 or 17020, please let us know about it. We would love to hear from you. The information you provide is so valuable and is a way for us to see standards implementation trends, what's working and what's not, and to identify opportunities for improvement and support. So we encourage all labs, whether you're implementing one standard or multiple, to complete an implementation survey. So we have this past summer established an electronic data collection tool or survey to help make this collection process easier and to help us improve on some of those reporting metrics that I shared earlier. You can access the survey via the QR code here, and once you're in it, you can choose the disciplines where standards on the registry are applicable and then choose your implementation status. And this electronic format is designed to save your data and your information, so when you need to make updates in the future, you don't have to start from scratch. Again, this information is so important and critical and can help us to assess the overall impact of the OSAC program and the impact of standards across the forensic landscape, determine which standards are most favored and effective versus those that might not be. So if you're interested in implementing standards on the registry, but you don't know where to start, there is help. OSAC has established an implementation mentor program where labs can connect with other labs for guidance and share information and tips. So if your lab has implemented standards on the registry and would like to be a resource for others, we encourage you to sign up to be a mentor. You can find forms to request a mentor or sign up to be a mentor on the OSAC website under the Implementation Resources heading. So it takes a village, and we look forward to working with ANAB and other forensic science stakeholders to continue to strengthen the fields through standards. There are several ways that you can get involved. We encourage you to join our OSAC mailing list to receive the latest forensic science standards information and updates. We also invite you to participate in the standards development process by commenting on standards that are being considered for the registry and going through the SDO process. This public comment period allows all people, from the smallest to the largest labs, from all backgrounds, to provide feedback on a standard. We really need people to share your voice and your expertise. And finally, if you'd like to participate in the actual shaping and drafting of standards, please consider becoming an OSAC member or affiliate. So I'd like to close today by just sharing a few takeaways. OSAC is a convener and a facilitator. Our drive is to improve forensic science through standards. And to do this, we rely on the dedication of members and stakeholders and data that supports standards implementation. Everyone can participate in the standards development and implementation processes because quality assurance is an equal opportunity endeavor. Stay on top of the latest standards updates, monitor and participate in the public comment periods, and let us know if your lab is using standards on the OSAC registry. It takes a village, and from OSAC's perspective, we want to make ourselves available and strengthen our relationship with ANAB and other stakeholders in this community. And we're here to help you because we all have a common goal to do the best forensic science possible. So let's build that house of quality together. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention today, and also again, thank ANAB for the invitation to speak.
Thank you, Allison. That was a really great presentation. I like your representation of the House of Quality. So we've had a few questions come in, but in order to give you time to submit your questions if you have any, I do want to go over some additional resources that we have available for accredited laboratories or laboratories that may be seeking accreditation. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, we have free webcasts on a variety of topics. They're about 5 to 20 minutes long, depending on the topic, and can be viewed at any time. We also have a blog page with a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standards requirements, and others. We provide these webinars monthly, and one upcoming topic in January is method witnessing during internal audits. Finally, we offer training in many different areas, including internal auditing, standards, risk, and other topics. Most of our traditional in-person courses were converted to online versions and include exercises and discussions related to the topic at hand. But we also offer in-person trainings, such as our training week during Assessor Development Week in San Antonio in January. We're offering 3 courses during that week: our Forensic Technical Assessor course, our Internal Audit Intensive Workshop, and a brand new course, Utilizing Standards, New Tools for Laboratory Improvement. During this week in San Antonio, you would also have the opportunity to network with ANAB assessors. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. Now we will get to your questions. So Allison, the first question that came in says, if it's encouraged to implement a standard before it's a final standard, and the process can take several years, how does that fare for the laboratories that do implement the standard when something is removed or changed after the standard has been finalized?
So that is a great question. It's really up to the lab to determine if they'd like to implement an OSAC proposed standard or wait for the published version. The OSAC proposed standard is intended to give labs a jump start, a head start on understanding what's in the standard and what they might be able to implement. We have seen some forensic science service providers say they are choosing not to implement OSAC proposed standards because it might change or be different from the published version. So it's really up to the forensic science service provider which direction they would like to go.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, do you see CABs integrating standards?
Yes, we do. So we are very appreciative of the information that CABs, forensic science service providers, are sending into us. So yes, we do see them integrating standards. We do have over 200 forensic science service providers that have let us know that they're using standards on the registry, which is great. We hope to see that number grow.
And then next, are there regulations that require the implementation of standards?
So as we saw in the airplane example, many industries are highly regulated, and standards are often enforced by incorporating them by reference into regulations. But again, regulations surrounding forensic science, however, are almost non-existent. There's not one national standard body, one national body that can say everyone must use XYZ standard. So
Right. And we saw this next question, we saw some data on this in your presentation, but what are the trends that you're seeing in standards implementation? Are there some standards or disciplines that are progressing more than others? And if so, would you know why?
yes, so again, we have seen the interdisciplinary standards, which should come as no surprise, that have been most implemented because they do go hand in hand with accreditation. Of course, DNA has a lot of standards and implementers, sees drugs, friction ridge. There are some areas that had no standards about 10 years ago and are now implementing. So surprisingly, CSI has had about 500 implementations, and they didn't really have standards a few years ago.
Great. And then we have one more question. I don't see any others in the Q&A box right now. Could you go over again how to get involved with OSAC to support standards development and implementation?
Sure. So I would say I would encourage you to check out our website. There you'll find a link to join our mailing list. So every month we send out a standards bulletin, which lists all of the standards that have been added to the registry that month, the standards that are open for comment at SDOs, those that are being considered for the registry. So just staying informed and aware about the standards moving through the development process is one way. Again, encouraging you to provide your expertise and your voice and your input on the standards that are open for public comment. So anyone can comment on this, and having everyone's expertise in the development process is really important. So we do have a website that specifically lists all of the standards that are open for comment, the standards that are being considered for the registry, and those going through the SDO process. There's instructions for how you can submit your comments and when they're due, so we encourage you to check that out. And again, if you want to get involved in the actual drafting of documents, we encourage you to become an OSAC member or affiliate. And again, the information, the application for how to get involved is on our website.
Excellent. Thank you. We did get one more question while you were speaking. The map with the percentage of standards implementers is enlightening. Does NIST list the number of FSSPs per state to provide more clarification on the percentage?
So we do have a page on our website that lists the forensic science service providers that have implemented. But I will say this list is only of those FSSPs that have given us permission to list them. So it is anonymous. If a forensic science service provider gives us permission to share their implementation status, we will do that. But otherwise, it's kept confidential.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you, Allison, again for volunteering to present this for us. It was very enlightening with the information that you provided on standards development in the forensic science community. We appreciate you taking the time today. We also appreciate our attendees for attending. And again, this will be available on our website in the future. If you have any other questions that you didn't get to ask, or you're watching this in the future, you can contact ANAB at training@anab.org or at anab@anab.org. If you'd like additional information about training or accreditation services, you can also email us at those email addresses as well. We appreciate you all taking the time to listen to this webinar. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.